everybody? Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. I am so excited to be here with you all on this Friday morning as there's a little bit of additional snow on the ground here in Seattle. Not sure what it's doing for you wherever you are. And I want to wish everybody that celebrates it a happy Valentine's Day. It's a Hallmark holiday, but it's certainly an opportunity to, share your feelings with somebody you care about. Galentine, whatever the guy's version of that is, family members, whoever. Honestly, there's not enough times in anyone's life that they get a chance to really express appreciation for somebody else. So take the opportunity, whatever it is, whoever it is, to say thank you and that you care. So we have this is a show that's kind of a measuring stick show. I gotta admit, like, there's a lot of folks that think that they're hardcore fans. They think that they are obsessed with the Seahawks. And when push comes to shove, they kind of fall out to the wayside when the real tough moments come. And this is one of them. This is where we are going. I'm excited. I'm genuinely excited to dive into the free agent fullback market. Yes, you heard me right. The free agent fullback market and the free agent center market. I can pretty much guarantee you there is no one who is paid to cover an NFL team at any level that will be doing a show on free agent fullbacks and centers. This is probably the only show across the entire industry where you will see focus on free agent fullbacks, period, let alone free agent fullbacks and centers. I'm combining all the glitz and glamour into one episode. We're going to talk about that here. Why? Because we got a new offensive coordinator, Clint Kubiak, who made it very clear. One, he runs an offense with a fullback. Two, elite center play is absolutely key to what you want to do in this offense. So we're going to spend some time talking about it. And we've always spent a lot of time talking about draft, and we'll get into draft there as well. Not as much today, but today we're going to talk about free agency. The other thing we're going to do today at 9:30, I get to welcome in a good friend of the show, John Boyle, of the Seattle Seahawks and Seahawks.com, who penned what I thought was a fantastic behind-the-scenes article of what was going on at the Senior Bowl with Mike McDonald, with the coaching staff, with the personnel department. Some of the quotes in there about how those two groups are working together, I thought were very illuminating and encouraging. And I wanted to bring John on the show to give us a little bit more color to the story that he wrote. And, very fortunate that John's going to take some time to come on and do that. So we got a great show. I figure we should probably get right to it. I want to thank everybody who is a YouTube member, everybody who's a Patreon member at patreon.com/hawkblogger, everybody who's already clicked like, everybody who is going to click like and subscribe. Really appreciate all of you. And, the fact that we can have a show at whatever time on a Friday, and we've got people around the world that tune in to hear about fullbacks and centers. Congratulations. You have passed the test. You are a hardcore Seahawks fan. With no further delay, let's get into it. I'm going to start with the position that I think we probably have the least amount of familiarity with, because honestly, the last time the Seahawks truly ran an offense that had a fullback in it was back when Michael Robinson was playing the position with Pete Carroll's team. And yes, we've had Nick Bellore. Yes, we've had other people that have kind of subbed into that role, but that was the last person whose primary position on the team was fullback. Brady Russell played some snaps at fullback last year. People might have missed it. Byron Murphy did play snap at fullback last year. They are few and far between. So I think we have to refamiliarize ourselves with what is a very small fraternity of fullbacks in the NFL. And we'll talk about some of them that are free agents that may be fits for the Seahawks. Some of them that may not. And as I already do that, there's already people showing their generosity. So Saucy Sasquatch, I love that handle, gifted 10 Hawk Blogger memberships. I don't know if we've met before, Saucy, so welcome and thank you for your generosity. Chris Clark, who I definitely have seen before, has gifted 5 Hawk Blogger memberships. So we're not even 10 minutes in, and there's 15 free Hawk Blogger memberships available for everybody to take advantage of. We are over 1,000 members. Over 1,000 members. Really, really appreciate everyone who's contributing and continuing to grow this great community. So, all right, let's get into fullbacks. Now, one of the things that you should understand is there's the potential that the Seahawks use players that are already on their roster to do that to do that role. They could take Brady Russell and have him maybe full-time commit to being a fullback. They could have other players that they decide to dedicate to be a fullback. They could have what's an H-back, which is kind of a mix between a tight end fullback. It's more of a Kyle Juszczyk kind of role. There's a lot of things they could do. Purpose of today is to add a little bit of color to some of the free agents that are available in that position group. And there's going to be some names that you know and some names that honestly you don't, or at least I didn't. Maybe you guys are even crazier than me, which wouldn't be the most surprising thing. And we're going to start with a name that I think is probably the most familiar. Because this is a guy that Jeff Simmons brought up earlier this offseason as a guy that could potentially help the Seahawks get really more physical in their run game. His name, if you don't know it, is Patrick Ricard. Now, that is not Jean-Luc Picard. It is Patrick Ricard. So any Star Trek folks out there, make sure you get that one right. And Mr. Ricard he's I think 30. He's 30 years old. He's going to be 31. He's 6'3". He's 300 pounds. He is a big man. All right. He played with the Ravens. So who knows him? Mike McDonald knows him. He was an AP first team All-Pro this year, second team All-Pro last year. He's been a Pro Bowler for 6 years in a row. Now, there is a little bit of, odd voting there. They have a dedicated slot for fullbacks. So you pretty much don't have a lot of competition to become a Pro Bowler, let alone an All-Pro, or vice versa, an All-Pro, let alone a Pro Bowler. But he has been essentially the best fullback in the AFC for the last 6 years. Okay. And he is a free agent. So that would seem to be a very obvious choice. One thing to know about Patrick Ricard, though, and it goes back to 6'3", 300 pounds. His specialty is gap blocking. And this has been the case throughout his career. So his grade this year, for what it's worth, in gap blocking, a 71.3 grade for gap blocking in the running game. He had a 50 grade in zone blocking. So he did both. I mean, he definitely did both. It's not like he doesn't have experience. It was roughly 50-50 split in terms of what percentage he was doing zone versus gap. But he's a big burly guy, and he's kind of designed for gap blocking schemes. Does that mean that he's not someone that Clint Kubiak will look at? I don't know. Obviously, Mike McDonald will have a lot of intel on him as a person and what he's like as a teammate. That might have something to do with it. But it's also worth kind of bringing up, he is really just a blocker. He had 5 targets all year. He caught 3 passes. He did catch a touchdown, but 3 passes he caught this year, 5 passes the previous year. His career high for passes caught in a season was 11. As far as carrying the football, he had 0 carries this year, 0 carries last year. His career high was 7 carries in 2022. He does not have a rushing touchdown in his career. So understand that while Patrick Ricard, I think, is going to be a name a lot of people talk about, and for good reason, I'm not as clear that he is the right fit for what Clint Kubiak's going to be looking for in that position. All right? Let's keep going. Another name, And this is a name that could be of interest to Mr. Clint Kubiak because he has familiarity with him. I didn't know this name ahead of time. I do now. His name is Adam Prentice. Who is Adam Prentice? Well, he was drafted in 2021. He is, let me get his height and weight for you. But the key thing here with Adam Prentice, he's 28 years old. He is 6 foot tall, 250 pounds. And most importantly, guess where he played his last 4 years, including last year? The New Orleans Saints. So he has familiarity with this coaching staff. He knows the scheme. He knows what he's going to be asked to do. And he's a free agent. So you've got a 28-year-old free agent fullback named Adam Prentice who played with the Saints last year. Now, with that in mind, I will say this. He also, for what it's worth, graded out much better as a zone blocking fullback than he did, as a gap blocking fullback than zone. He had a 71.3 grade with gap scheme, same grade as Patrick Ricard. He was slightly better than Ricard in zone blocking. He had a 55.2 grade, which is just a little bit higher than Ricard's 50. So again, I think that if I was to guess, one, from a price perspective, two, from a familiarity perspective, Adam Prentice would be a plug-and-play addition for Clint Kubiak. Wouldn't have to teach him anything. He'd already know. He'd be able to bring that to the table. I think the other thing to kind of check on with Adam Prentice, what has he done as a receiver or as a rusher? Has he done anything else? Well, he had 0 carries this year. He had 2 the year before, 4 the year before. He has never had a rushing touchdown. His career high in yards for a season on the ground is 12. So he's not a runner. Receiving, he had 4 targets, 0 receptions this year. His career high in receptions for a season is 3. He has 0 receiving touchdowns. So again, this is another guy that is a blocker and not much else. That might be a good thing. That might be a bad thing. Don't know. But Adam Prentice is the second guy to know on this list. And just to give you some idea, I mean, Patrick Ricard, as much as he is one of the best, if not the best fullbacks in football, his salary last year was $3.8 million was his APY. Adam Prentice was 1.1. I wouldn't be surprised if they pinch a few pennies there, you know? So just to give you, like, we're not talking even with the top of the market. We're not talking about a lot of money for this position. Another name, as we kind of go through this, Reggie Gilliam is a free agent. He's played with Buffalo his whole career. He's 6 foot, 244 pounds, and he has not, he's gotten not a ton of snaps, but he's got 174 snaps this past year. He's been a pretty excellent pass blocker. His pass block rating was 79.7. And if you look at him, this is where he becomes a little bit more interesting. Reggie Gilliam had the same grade as a zone blocking fullback as he did as a gap blocking fullback. 68.4 for zone, 68.6 for gap. If you haven't been kind of following along, that is the highest zone blocking grade for a fullback we've talked about so far. The other two guys were 55 or under. Reggie Gilliam for the Bills, 68.4. So I think Reggie Gilliam's an interesting one to maybe add to the list to watch. Again, I don't think that he's going to be somebody who is going to break the bank to sign Reggie Gilliam if that's what you want to do. He's only 27 years old, which is nice. He's, again, 6 foot, 244 pounds. And from a multifunctional perspective, he as well is, zero targets this year, 0 receptions. He does have 2 receiving touchdowns in his career. His career high for receptions in a season was 8, so it's not like he's a Kyle Juszczyk kind of player. He had 3 rushing attempts for 7 yards this year. That was his career high. He has no rushing touchdowns in his career. A little bit more of a receiving target, but I think it's a stretch to call him multifunctional. He seems like a young fullback who's shown some ability to be a good zone blocking fullback. So Reggie Gilliam, also a free agent. I like the fact that he's a little bit on the younger side. And I like the fact that he's been adept at both styles of run blocking. So he's another name to watch. A fourth name to watch on the fullback watch list, Michael Burton. Michael Burton is another one. He is 33, so he's a little bit on the older side. He's 5'11", so a little squattier, 247 pounds. All right. And he's been in the league a while, most recently with the Denver Broncos the last couple of years, but he's been with the Chiefs. He's been with the Saints before Clint Kubiak. He's been with the Commanders, the Bears, the Lions. Okay. And when you look at Michael Burton's numbers, similar to Reggie Gilliam, he does pretty well as a run blocker. In fact, his overall run blocking score, this isn't specific to scheme, but his overall run blocking score is second only to Kyle Juszczyk's in the NFL among fullbacks, and it's barely better. So Kyle Juszczyk was a 69.7 graded run blocker. Michael Burton was 69.6, so 0.1 different than Kyle Juszczyk. So I think that's interesting. When you get to talking about which kind of blocking scheme they were better at, one or the other, Michael Burton was 65.1 zone, 66.3 gap. So a little bit better gap, but again, not quite Reggie Gilliam at 68.4, but pretty close. And so Michael Burton, again, a little bit on the older side. From what I can see, does not have an overlap. Now, he might have overlapped. Let's see here. He was with the Broncos the last 2 years. The Seahawks just signed Justin Otten as the run game coordinator. He's been with the Titans the last couple of years. So I don't think he was with the Broncos in 2022. And Mr. Burton was with the Chiefs in 2022. So they don't have overlap. Neither does Kubiak as far as I could tell. But Michael Burton, another name who's been a pretty effective fullback so far in his career. So those are, I think, 4 names to kind of be aware of. There's a couple others that we can take a look at, and I will. Christian Welch is a free agent. He's drafted by the Ravens and has been with the Ravens. 6'3", 240. Was a linebacker originally, but really is not played. I think he is not. He got 1 snap in his entire career, and that was in 2021. Robert Burns is the only other free agent fullback. He played for the Falcons, or at least he was on the Falcons. He has 0 snaps in his career. 5'10", 222 pounds. So I think when you're talking about free agent fullbacks, you're really talking about Patrick Ricard. You're talking about Adam Prentice, who, again, has familiarity with the Saints system. You're talking about Reggie Gilliam, and you're talking about Michael Burton. And of all those guys, I mean, it's probably most likely that Adam Prentice is on their list because they could just plug and play. But Reggie Gilliam, to me, is interesting. Seems like a little bit better of an athlete and maybe a little bit more of an upside. So that's a guy that I would keep in mind as we're looking at this position going into what will be a new era of Seahawks offensive football. Just checking to see here any questions or other things coming up in chat. We'll get to centers, and I'm almost thinking that I might want to do that after we finish with Mr. Boyle. But I'm curious, of those names, who are the ones that kind of get your attention? Anyone that excites you guys or kind of piques your interest more than others? I know there's some folks that are going to want to say Nick Bellore. I don't think that that's likely. I think Nick Bellore, I can go back. I might as well do this. I'll look back at Nick Bellore's career. But when he's been a run blocker or a fullback in the past, I just don't know that he was a great fullback. I mean, he's a great guy. He's a great teammate. He's a fantastic special teams player and had a great year in special teams again for the Commanders. But I'm not sure that that's really the fit. So I'm going back to see if I can get some Nick Bellore numbers. I mean, last time I got some numbers for Nick Bellore, this is back in 2022. He had 13 snaps, 12 as a run blocker. He had a 46 grade in zone and 60 in gap. I mean, I don't know that Nick Bellore is the answer. I know he's a fan favorite. I just don't know that he's going to be the answer. So that's one. I think we've also talked about Taysom Hill. Keep in mind, Taysom Hill was on the squad last year. He wasn't their fullback. Like, he was a different kind of position. Yes, he had a lot of utility, but they weren't going to stick Taysom Hill and have him run into other players over and over and over again. I want to also talk about, there's folks who are like, just play Byron Murphy there. Folks, I mean, Mike McDonald already said it, but I'll explain if you don't understand why. Mike McDonald said he is not going to be our fullback. He might get some snaps there, but he's not going to be our fullback. You spend a 16th pick in the first round on a guy you think can be maybe the future of your defensive line, who had, if you watch the show I did on him, a pretty darn good rookie year for what he was asked to do. It's already a physical position. Longevity is already an issue in the NFL. The last thing you want is to say, okay, your job is to run headlong into other people over and over and over again on offense, and then we're going to ask you to be a great defender as well. You're going to shorten his career. You're going to do it at the least valuable position in the NFL. I mean, I think other than long snapper, I'm not sure anyone gets paid less than fullbacks. So it doesn't make sense for Byron Murphy to be a regular fullback. Will they maybe consider it in goal line situations now and then? Maybe for fun, but that's not a thing. It's not going to happen. So while I think that Taysom Hill could be in the mix, I don't think it's to be a fullback. Looking through the rest of this, someone says that they had a dream about Will Tukuafu last night, a former fullback, former defensive lineman. They played a fullback. He was great. I loved him. I think Brady Russell certainly is a guy that could be in the mix for this. Personally, I felt like his reads as a back were not very good last year, and I'm not sure that you can teach that. So I'm a little bit concerned on that regard. And then, we're talking about some of the draft picks. People are talking about Willie Lampkin. Yep. Understand. We talked about some of the draft options before, and we'll definitely talk about them again. And then looking down, more Willie Lampkin love. Yeah, and that should give you some idea. When you heard us talk about, myself and Ryan Fowler talk about Willie Lampkin before as an option in the draft, you might have thought, well, what, 270 pounds? Like, you're not going to play a 270-pound player in the backfield. Well, Patrick Ricard is an all-pro at 300 pounds as a fullback. So it's not out of the question. Now here's Zach, who's a member, saying, Cam Scatterbo as a fullback is disrespectful, guys. LOL. I understand where that's coming from, because I think Cam Scatterbo is a guy that can definitely be a halfback in this league. I'm not saying he can't be in the backfield as the primary runner. But when you've got a guy like him who absolutely loves contact and is that physical, he can play the fullback position. Not every halfback can. So to me, it's not an insult. It's a compliment that he's got the potential to be, I think, a lot more than just your typical fullback who runs into the line and just hits the line from me. He could be a guy that you actually integrate in the offense, becomes one of your eligible receivers, becomes a guy that's an offensive weapon with multiplicity to what he can offer as opposed to just being a blocker. Now, I don't think that would probably be his first choice of how to be utilized. And I think he spent a lot of his career trying to prove that he's more than just a battering ram, that he's a weapon on offense. And so it's probably a long shot anyway. But from a point of view of the highest skill player that you could get into that fullback role, Cam Skattebo might be the name, like the most skilled player you could get into that role. The closest you could get to someone like Kyle Juszczyk back when he was, really Kyle Juszczyk, who was a great physical blocker, a terrific receiver, a good runner. He was a weapon. He was a legitimate weapon. He's not that anymore, but Skattebo could be something like that. So I wouldn't totally poo-poo the idea. I do think it's probably unlikely for a variety of reasons, but I don't think it's out of the question at all. We got a super chat from Kane Musk, who's been a member for 7 months. Thank you, Kane, for all your support. He says, are there any good fullbacks in the draft or in college? Yeah, we will talk about that. We'll not be covering that as much on the show today. We'll do, we've talked about, if you want, I recommend going back and listening to our episode with Ryan Fowler, where I went into fullback options in the draft, and he listed off a bunch. I'll also be talking about this with Dane Brugler coming up next time he's on the show. So we will definitely cover more on the draft. I wanted today to kind of focus a little bit more on free agency. So we're going to transition and talk about this Senior Bowl. Since speaking of the draft, talking about what happened down at the Senior Bowl and what we saw there from the Seahawks, as well as what happened behind the scenes. And in order to do that, I'm going to bring on John Boyle to share some of the stories he has for what was going on there. And hopefully John's able to turn on his webcam. If not, I'll just keep him off. But John, are you there?
I am here, and I thought my camera was on. Let's try again.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to want to be on.
No.
That's okay. We could just talk like
go
this.
Without? All right.
Yeah, let's do this.
I got all pretty for nothing.
I know. Well, I can imagine just how you look, and it's fantastic, John.
Oh, thank you.
How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Just, getting ready for, as you said, the draft is sooner than we think, and free agency and all that. So always busy.
So for folks that don't know, they'd be crazy to not. John Boyle works for the Seahawks, writes up at Seahawks.com, does amazing stuff. He and a lot of folks are doing great work over there. But John, for folks that don't know, what happens for you in the off season? Like, where do you spend your time when the games aren't flying by?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still at the VMAC most days, and for people who pay close attention to the NFL calendar, there's some lulls, and this is one of the quieter times. But between things like the Senior Bowl, free agency coming up, I'll go to the Combine in a couple of weeks, so there's plenty to stay busy. The first couple of weeks after season ends is a lot of just sort of looking back, reflecting on the season that was and recapping, and then it's turning ahead to all these big off-season kind of big tentpole things that happen.
So I know we've only got you for a bit, and I wanted to really focus on this article you wrote behind the scenes with the Seahawks at the 2025 Senior Bowl. And it was fun. You came by, found me in the stands obsessing about one-on-one drills, and it was great to catch up with you there. Was that your first time at the Senior Bowl?
It was, yeah. In the past, that has not been an event we've gone to. In part, a lot of years we've had the good fortune of being in the playoffs, and it's a pretty tight turnaround if you're a playoff team to get there. But then also kind of what was the impetus this year was knowing that Mike was going and, going to get a chance to kind of see him be around the scouts and be a part of that process this time.
How much do you get an opportunity? Obviously, you get a lot of exposure to the coaches and the players during the season. how much exposure do you get to the front office, the personnel people, and the scouts?
I'm lucky. They've been really good about giving us access. So it's, a lot of those guys, the area guys aren't in the building a lot of the year. All football season, they're out, scouting whatever area they're in. A lot of them don't live in the area. So, a guy like a Matt Berry or Nolan Teasley, they're around all year and I see them a lot. Some of those other guys, it's nice that I get a good chunk of time with them at the combine. During the draft. And then, there's several months you barely see him in the building. So, as I said, I'm very fortunate that we've, as a department, we've built a lot of trust with those guys. We've been around them a lot. So they do let us, as the story kind of outlines, like I was kind of fly on the wall through a lot of what they're doing there. And I'll do the same. I've been doing the same thing with the combine for several years.
It sounded like you kind of needed to like oysters to get the most out of this trip.
Yeah, that was right? That was a good time. Yeah, I kind of get into this in the story, but it was I think it was the Tuesday night at the interviews. Trent Kirshner and Steve Hutchinson were raving about all the oysters they put down, and decided to make it a repeat engagement on Wednesday after practice. And it turned into pretty much the whole department was there, and John Schneider was there, and yeah, just lots and lots of oysters, a few pitchers of beer. It was a good time.
You talked a lot about the atmosphere that's created with that personnel department. Say from obviously you don't have the same exposure to other teams, so to compare and contrast is probably a little bit hard, but it sounds like you got a little bit of an impression that what's going on in Seattle is a little bit unique.
Indeed. Yeah. Like that's all I've known being around personnel guys other than just, meeting guys here and there. But what kind of really made that kind of obvious was talking to, Alonzo Highsmith, who spent some time with the Seahawks. He joined us for a while. He sat down and he kind of pointed out, like, he's been with a bunch of different teams as a player and as an executive. And he's like, what you guys have here, there's not a lot of this around the league. He did point out Green Bay is kind of similar. And I think that, makes sense with John Schneider having that lineage they're coming from there. And it's, you go back to like the earliest days when Pete and John got hired and they talked about like no egos, open doors. That's something Matt Berry brought up that point when I talked to him. It's like that draft room is sort of the heart of all this. And it's a very open place. You can have a young, intern or first year scout challenging something that John Schneider's saying. And it's, they have fun. They bust each other's chops a lot, but it's just a really healthy environment of like, they work their butts off, but they also have a good time. And there's just a lot of respect and not a lot of egos in there. And that really starts with John.
I think every single fan feels like they can be an offensive coordinator and call plays. And every single fan feels like they can make better draft choices, or personnel decisions than the GM. Like that's kind of the nature of being a fan.
That's part of being a fan.
I would think that that's also a challenge of being in the front office, being in these personnel situations is they know opportunity cost. Every single draft pick you make, every single dollar you spend on the cap is a draft pick not spent on another player. All the players picked after it are options. Every player you don't spend that money on is a player you potentially could have spent that money on. How much do you get the impression that there's, that there's a lot of, I guess what I would say there is I've heard from John Schneider, there's a lot of reflecting on their process and trying to improve it year after year after year. And he's been pretty vocal about that. Is that something that you've picked up on and talking with the personnel department?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, these guys, they're very good at what they do. They're very smart. They know football, but they also are smart enough to know they're not perfect at it. And it's, this is a very like bottom line business. It's easy to know when you miss. Like you can go back and look at a draft a few years and be like, okay, we made this mistake here. We reached for need or we missed on the, the character of a guy. There's just, it's pretty easy to see your mistakes over time. So, they're always evaluating that, it's kind of the evaluator knowing, evaluating the evaluator, if you will. And they, they kind of cross-check each other is a big part of it too. Not like in a mean way, but like, hey, what are you seeing here? Why do we like this guy? And just, you don't want to just assume because guys can kind of, you scout the same guy for a while, you kind of get enamored with a guy and that's natural. So that's why you cross-check these guys. So yeah, for sure. I mean, as you point out, John's been, he's been open about this. He's talked about it in public of like, whenever that was 3-4 years ago, they drastically shrunk the draft board. And, I think maybe there's been a little more focus that he indicated a couple of years ago and like really getting to like know the guy and like how much they love football and the guys. And that really fits what Mike wants too. I mean, Mike's made the point several times of like the way he wants to coach, the way he wants to practice, like they're hard on guys. They're going to go hard on guys, and you really got to love it to want to do that. It's like you're not going to last in a Mike Macdonald team if you're not in football for the right reasons.
Yeah, I loved the insight and the quote you had there from Mike Macdonald about, I think you had this in one of your previous articles as well in the Senior Bowl. It wasn't about like, hey, we're looking for this particular skill set. It was, he's watching in 1v1s when you get beat. How do you respond to it? How do you come back the next play? And I think that speaks to exactly what you're just talking about. There's a specific type of person that he wants in the building.
Yeah, I mean, that's I think why these guys like the Senior Bowl so much is like it's the combine's great. The medical is really important. The interviews are really important, and confirming what you thought about a guy on tape with the 40 and the broad jump and all that, those things all matter. But the Senior Bowl is a different animal just in terms of you've got to put pads on, and you've got to go look at go up against good players who maybe are better than what you saw in college, and you're gonna. I can't remember who the tackle was, but somebody went viral for getting steamrolled in a pass rush drill.
Josh Connerly Jr.
There you go. How'd he respond to that? Like, I don't know. I can't say I watched enough of the practice to tell you what his next 2 days were like. But if he bounced back and did really well, I'm sure the scouts are like, okay, hey, that guy showed us something. If he, went in a shell and got down on that, then that's going to tell him something too. And I can't find the exact quote off the top of my head, but Mike Macdonald made a really good point. It's like he wants guys who love football, not guys who love being football players. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think it sounds kind of the same when you hear it, but it's like, okay, there might be somebody that likes being a football player in terms of like, I get the money, I get the attention, I get the love versus I love being out there on the practice field Wednesday, repping stuff with my teammates and figuring out, game planning, all that. And that's, those things, don't always just show up on tape. So that's why these pre-draft things are so important.
I want to read a segment of your article, and everyone should make sure they check out the full article up at Seahawks.com. It's really, really a must read if you're a Seahawks fan. But it says, after thanking the team scouts and giving some big picture thoughts on his first season as Seattle's head coach, Mike Macdonald then proceeded to give a detailed position by position breakdown of the team, one that provided an honest assessment of the roster. And Nolan Teasley, the assistant general manager, said, that was awesome to hear him take us through the maturation of our team and our roster. It just added some clarity. It goes on, but that's something that I think jumped out to everybody that read it. Is that something that is common, or was this something that was kind of a new thing for the personnel group?
Obviously, he's having those conversations with those guys, but I think the way he did that, from talking to a couple of those guys after, I think I might have quoted Aaron Heinlein about it, like that like is like direct and thorough as it was. And the way it was funny because kind of to take you behind the scenes, so we're in the suite, everyone's watching practice wrapping up, and it's kind of just people BS and having fun. And then John starts talking, and I think he's just gonna do a quick like, thanks guys, da da da. So I just hanging out in the room, and we have a video person in the room too, not filming. And then Mike starts going, and about halfway through that, I'm like, should I be in here for this? Like, this seems awfully, I get a lot of good access, but this seems like too much. But it was really cool to see. I can't share a lot of it in the story, what he said, but it was very enlightening. I think I've learned a lot about the team in those 20 minutes that I probably didn't know before. But I do think, even for the scouts, it was like, just a really good, like, honest assessment of, okay, where we're at, what we're looking for. He talked about some specific needs he sees coming into the offseason. But then also, and I touched on this, like the way he handled it, and I talked to John Schneider about this a little bit afterwards, just when we were at the Oyster Place I referenced, that relationship between front office and coaching staff, like by its nature, it can get a little contentious because it's like, if things aren't going good, whose fault is it? Do we not have the right players? Are we not coaching and developing them right? And that obviously, as Todd Lewicki famously said 15 years ago, that became a problem before the Pete and John era. And that's something they looked to address by kind of creating that harmony there. And so it was the way Mike did it. It was not like hey guys, we have this need because you didn't get me the right players. It was like very collaborative, like, okay, we need to develop, like, I really like what this player can bring, but he's young, we need to develop him. And so it's like a very, we're all on the same page. We're all going in the same direction. How do we collectively, personnel and coaching staff, get better this offseason?
I'm curious, John, if you could share, great. If you can't, that's fine as well. You know your boundaries. In that kind of that session, you've talked about how much Mike cares about the person and not just the player and not just who they are as a football player. How much of what was talked about was about, football aspects versus, players versus, we think we're growing here, or we think that we need some injection of veteran, like how much of it was just, about the player, how much of it was about the position and the person?
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously not getting specifics about specific guys, but it was everything. I mean, it was, areas of depth concern, areas of they need to develop, areas, some, kind of just like scheme fit kind of thing. So it was everything. I mean, he was pretty thorough going through the roster. He didn't go position or player by player, but it was more like, okay, we're going to talk about this position now. And so, it wasn't just him giving a speech. The scouts would kind of, okay, well, if we're changing, by then we knew that there was a new offensive coordinator and they're working on some new staff. So there's some questions of, okay, like how does this change how we evaluate offensive linemen, for example? So knowing that, the famous, Shanahan Kubiak scheme they're going to run. So it was a little bit of everything. I mean, it was, not super in depth. It probably only took 15, 20 minutes, but he covered a lot of ground.
Well, I mean, you also in the article talk about the juxtaposition between this year and last year. John Schneider wasn't even at the Senior Bowl. Obviously, Mike McDonald wasn't because he wasn't even the Seahawks head coach yet. They went through a lot of that offseason with the personnel staff kind of filling in and not necessarily knowing what the coaches wanted or knowing the scheme. There's a lot of questions last year to the personnel department about, how are you going to draft or acquire without knowing the scheme? And, they did the best that they could. But I think you saw during the season, once they actually had some time together, and really dialed things in, pretty much every move they made during the season made the team better. And so do you get that feeling that they're really looking forward to this offseason of having a lot more clarity of who they're trying to acquire and what they need to do?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, Mike would preface this answer with he hopes to be coaching during the Senior Bowl next year and, getting ready for a championship game or a Super Bowl or whatever. But in terms of, yeah, I mean, we saw it, like, not, Mike's never going to call it one specific guy and say he was a problem, but like, you don't make the changes in season they did if you've had it nailed from the beginning. So it's like, that's kind of the unfortunate reality of a coaching change is like, you can't get the roster perfect that first year. You're not going to nail every acquisition to be the right fit. And, as you said, most of the moves they made, they made a change and they got better at that spot. So I do think having a full off season of, the scouts know more, have a better feel now for what Mike wants. Mike can actually get to know some of these guys more and weigh in more. I'm going to be really curious to see how the combine interviews look. Because for years Pete was very much running the show. It was, a mixture of scouts and coaches, but Pete was kind of driving the interview. And then, a Matt Berry or an Aaron Heidline would chime in with questions. Whereas last year there were no coaches there. So it was very scout driven. So I'll be curious to see kind of what the combine interviews even look like, because I would assume there's going to be some coaches there. I know Mike's going because he's scheduled to talk to the media one of the days there, but I would guess we're going to see some assistant coaches there as well. So yeah, I think you're not going to get every acquisition perfect this offseason, but I think you're going to have a much better feel heading into free agency and into the draft what this team needs and what Mike is looking for in individual players, not just in terms of their physical makeup, but their personality, the way they, their football smarts, the way they see the game, all that stuff.
Hey, John, I know time's tight for you. Do you have time for 2 more questions?
Yeah, I'm good.
Awesome. All right. So you talked about the interviews at the combine and you talked a little bit about them at the Senior Bowl. I don't know if you had a chance to sit in on those or not, but without getting into any of the specific players or questions or anything like that.
Oh, I had a list for you. Sorry.
I know the boundaries to at least to some extent. So I'm curious, like, what's the general tone and tenor of those kinds of conversations? How much of it's about football? How much of it's about the person?
Yeah. The Senior Bowl ones, I'm a little, the way it was set up is a little hard for me to like, in the combine, it's like in a suite and everybody's just sitting in the room and you hear everything. The Senior Bowl ones, the way it was spread out at different tables, like without me like awkwardly hovering, I couldn't hear a lot of what was going on. So I'm just more getting kind of watching, getting the tone and then hearing from the scouts afterwards. I do know that these, they tend to feel more casual for the athletes, I think, because there's rotating through this huge convention center, table to table. I think that combine setting can be, for some guys a little intimidating. You see guys who, I've seen, I'm not going to name names, but I've seen guys in combine interviews in years past seem like very tight, nervous, And then you see him in an interview later on TV and you're like, oh, that guy's totally different than what I heard in that room. So, they have agents training them for it. And they're, I think that the agent side of it probably makes it harder on the scouts because the guys are so well coached now. They're maybe not getting the full honest answers they want. But I do think the variety of different ways to interview guys is important. When you're interviewing a guy, I think Nolan said they talk to every single player there in some capacity. So you start to build that because a lot of these guys I haven't talked to yet. If it's a guy maybe you've talked to a little bit, but for the most part, this is the first real contact with them. So it's okay. We get a little information here. We get to know them. We build a familiarity, and then you go to the combine, and then you see them at their pro days in the spring. So it's sort of just the more you can talk to these guys, the more you can kind of get a real feel for them versus just one interview. And they can even talk to the guy. The way the Senior Bowl set up, they can talk to him more than once. Like you can request second interviews. There's a more informal part of it. So they do get a good amount of time with these prospects.
Has anyone broke the news to Mike McDonald that there's a tradition for Seahawks coaches to pull their shirt off?
Shirt off. I don't know if he knows about that yet, but maybe We'll put that in his ear before.
You may want to warn him, let him know to do a few more crunches between now and the combine. But no, last question I had for you, John, obviously separate from this article, but you mentioned obviously the Seahawks have added Clint Kubiak. They've added a bunch of coaches since the Senior Bowl as well. What's your initial impressions of these guys? Have they started to come? Obviously Clint Kubiak was there. Are they starting to gather in Seattle? They still haven't moved here yet to even start the process. Like, how's that going so far?
Yeah, I've seen the two that have already been announced, the line coach, Benton and Giacomo, the quarterbacks coach. I've seen them around the building a little bit, just said hi. So they're here. I know there's a couple more that have reported that aren't official yet, so I don't know the timing of those moves. But Kubiak's presser to me, he seems like a perfect Mike McDonald guy. Like, seemed pretty no nonsense, just like all about ball. I really like the way he talked, because I think we all think of these Shanahan coaching tree schemes and think of kind of flashy stuff. But like so much of like what they are at their base is like really fundamental run scheme stuff. And he hit on that. Like, we'll get the bells and whistles later, but we got to just get good at running and, running the routes and blocking and catching and all that stuff. So I do think it's just going to be much how Mike likes the offense. Like, we're just going to be very detail oriented, drill it like crazy in practice to get it right. So I think a lot of the elements of that scheme should help Geno Smith in terms of, probably some more under center, move him around a little more, hopefully some more play action, all that stuff. I think Geno had so much on his plate last year. As Pete Carroll, who got it from Bill Walsh, always like to say, like, the best thing you can do for a quarterback is make his job easier. So I think this scheme should do that.
Yeah, it's such a contrast when you sit back and think about it between this year and last year, where you've got Mike McDonald coming in, first time as a head coach, youngest head coach in the league. They are hiring late. They're bringing on a coaching staff that, because he's the youngest coach and hasn't been a head coach before, a lot of these are new names that haven't worked together. So it wasn't a nepotism kind of coaching staff. They were all getting to know each other on offense and on defense. Even Ryan Grubb, who was coming here last year, Scott Huff came with him, but that was it. The rest of that offensive coaching staff was having to come together. Now, this year, Mike McDonald knows what it means to be a head coach. He's done it relatively successfully. His coach that he's bringing to be his offensive play caller is someone he knows and has familiarity with. And that coach, Clint Kubiak, is bringing in a whole host of people that he's worked with for years. There will be no time needed for them to get to know each other. They'll all be able to kind of enter saying, this is what needs to happen. It feels like a massive difference that could really change the fortunes of the team.
Yeah, like I fully understand what Mike's thought last year, and this makes a lot of sense, is like, I want to hire the right people versus guys, just trying to bring in guys I know. Exactly. And also part of it was, as you said, there's kind of just the reality of the time. Like, he can't, the Ravens aren't going to let him just bring the whole defensive staff with him or whatever. So I totally see the process of why he did it the way he did it. And I think that led to some really cool hires who are still here. But I think there is a lot of value in terms of like getting up and running for this season when you're going to have this offensive staff has a lot of familiarity when, all these guys they're adding have worked with Clint Kubiak in some capacity. A couple of them have a little bit of overlap with Mike here and there. So I just think, in terms of the guys are bringing in, what the focus seems to be in terms of how they want this offense to look. I just think it's going to help them. There's always some growing pains when you change scheme, but you've got a veteran quarterback who's played in a million schemes and seen a ton of football. I do think that the way they're building the staff should help that adjustment go faster.
Well, John, really appreciate you taking some time before you spend some time with your family, who I know must love the off season. They actually get to see you a little bit more and a little bit more consistently. Thanks for coming on and giving us a little bit more insight into what's going on with the team.
Absolutely. Sorry, I couldn't get the camera to work there, but probably just as well for your viewers.
Yeah, they have to stare at my face, so it's definitely not a bonus. All right,
thanks,
John,
Brian.
thanks so much, man. Have a great time.
You too.
All right, that was John Boyle of the Seattle Seahawks coming on to spend a little time with us, talking a little bit more about what's going on behind the scene there. A lot of great stuff there. And John, it's a really interesting role that he's got. I mean, I knew John from when he was at the Everett Herald and doing great work there. In fact, I was on with Raiders Radio, was it yesterday, Wednesday, whenever it was. And I was looking up something to make sure I got it right, and it was about Pete Carroll saying that he was hormonal. And I wanted to make sure that it was not just in my brain, but true. And the first article that popped up was John Boyle from the Everett Herald writing about Pete being hormonal. So anyway, John, he's an excellent reporter. He knows what he's doing. And there's a decision you make when you work for the team. You're going to get access that you're never going to get any other way. But there's a limit to what you can say, when you can say it, how you can say it. The great Claire Farnsworth obviously was there before John, and Claire was an unbelievable reporter at the PI before he came to the Seahawks. And so I think we're very fortunate to have John doing that. And I think they've got some great writers in training there as well that I'd love to get on the show at some point and introduce you guys to them. But yeah, really fortunate to have John. And I think these kind of behind the scenes articles that he writes, honestly, I just don't know that we got stuff like that as much before. I think has been able to push the boundaries and build enough trust that he can share, a little bit more to where, I'll be totally honest, for a lot of years, I just wouldn't read Seahawks or team-based content because it was so sanitized that there wasn't anything new really there. But if you read this article from John yesterday, there was a lot of stuff that you literally just won't get anywhere else. You won't get it from a national reporter. You won't get it from a beat writer. No one else has that access. And the fact that John's able to publish that stuff is something that, we should all feel fortunate to have. So really appreciate him coming on, taking some time, because off season for him is time for family time. So nice that he spent some time with us instead. We got a super chat from PGZ206, who's been a member for 5 months. PGZ, thank you so much. And he gifts 5 Hawk Blogger memberships. 5 Hawk Blogger memberships for 5 months as a member. I love the symmetry there. Thank you, PGZ, for your generosity and for supporting the show. Absolutely love it. So I promised you 3 things. Fullback free agency. John Boyle. Last thing, if you remember, free agent centers. Okay, here we go with free agent centers. There's nothing more exciting than free agent fullbacks, but we're going to try with free agent centers. And this one, I haven't had as much time to do all the digging that I wanted to do. So keep that in mind. But there's a few names that are obvious that we'll talk about. But there's also some names that maybe less obvious for what it's worth. So the first name that I wanted to bring up is a name you're going to hear a lot. His name's Ryan Kelly. He has been a very good center for a number of years. And if you look at Ryan Kelly's career, he's 31, going to be 32 come May. He's 6'4", 307. He was a first-round draft pick. He's a guy that has been one of the better centers in football. And what does that look like? That has been a 4-time Pro Bowler, 1-time second-team AP All-Pro. So he was a Pro Bowler as recently as 2023. He's dealt with some injuries. He only played 10 games last year. And the question is, how much does he have left? Centers should be able to play into their mid-30s, so it might not be that big of a problem. But if you look at him from a blocking perspective, he has been pretty good in as a pass blocker and a run blocker, not elite. But last year, you know, he was 28th in the NFL among centers in run blocking grade. From a zone blocking perspective, I lost him. Where'd it go? There we go. He had a 57.8 grade as a zone blocking center. He had a 72 grade as a gap blocking center. And so this is one of the questions I've got with Ryan Kelly from a fit perspective. I'm not sure he makes a ton of sense as a zone scheme center. He's a little bit bigger. He's not as much of a mover as I think you generally looking like. He's definitely smart enough to do it, but he's lower on the list, I think, overall. And for what it's worth, he was the 46th graded center as a zone blocking center last year. We can go back a year. Let's just take a quick look back a year and see maybe a year where he played a little bit more, the year that he made the Pro Bowl. Maybe we get some different information on Ryan Kelly. Maybe he shows up better as a zone blocker in that season. But I'll take a quick look here. He was the 15th graded zone blocker in last year. He had a 75.4 grade that was actually higher than his gap blocking grade, which is 71.1. So that's encouraging. That might be something to, you know, keep in mind. If we go back, let's go back another couple of years and see if we can find a little bit more of a trend here. Now, I will say that part of what the zone scheme requires is movement. And what's something that is going to decay the most on a player as they age is their ability to move. So it might be that he was once something and is not quite that anymore. I go back a few years and yeah, he was the 37th graded zone blocking center. So, you know, I don't think that this is a disqualifier for Ryan Kelly, but I think it's at least a hesitation with him as a fit. But he is a free agent and he should be, I think, more affordable for sure than kind of the top of the market guys. The other name you're going to hear over and over and over again, Drew Dahlman. Now, Drew Dahlman is a guy that played for Atlanta, is on the younger side. He's 26 years old and has had a very good career as a blocker, as a center, and specifically as a zone blocking center. So last year, Drew Dahlman was the 6th highest graded zone blocking center in the NFL, 82.3 grade. That is above Pro Bowl level, right? He was 65 in gap blocking, which is not bad. In that, he was 16th. So you've got 6 and 16 in terms of his rankings among centers. You want to know who the top graded center in zone blocking was last year? Eric McCoy. Who's Eric McCoy? He was Clint Kubiak's center in New Orleans who got injured and only played 7 games. So I think that bodes well for what John Benton can do when given the opportunity to coach some guys up. Eric McCoy had his highest grade as a run blocker with the Saints. He had years, with John Benton. He had years where he was a 60 graded run blocker or a 66 graded run blocker. He was 94.5 as an overall run blocker last year. So there's also opportunity for John Benton to coach up some of these guys from what they've been. So Drew Dahlman certainly is going to be someone that people are going to talk about, and they should. But let's talk about where his projected cost is going to be. All right. We're going to look at valuation from over the cap. I mean, Over the Cap has him at a $1.8 million deal. Now, I just, I don't think that's realistic. If we go to PFF, and we go to free agents, they have their rankings at what contracts would be. And if we get to Drew Dahlman, they have him as the 22nd rated overall free agent. Let me get to centers. They're projecting a 4-year deal, averaging $11.5 million per year, $27.5 guaranteed, $46 million total. I don't think that's I mean, if that's what he's going to sign for, I think he's a realistic target. I don't think that's crazy at all. Now, I think if you go Drew Dahlman, then you're going, you might not be getting a free agent center, or sorry, free agent guard. I don't know if you do both, but if you can get Drew Dahlman at that price, great. I think that my biggest question there is, are the Falcons going to let him go? Like, why wouldn't the Falcons be the team that would be willing to pay him more than anybody else? That offense was cooking last year. They've got their young receiver, their young quarterback, their young running back. Drew Dahlman's in the middle of all of it. It would be a pretty big mistake by the Falcons to let this guy walk. So I do wonder if he's even really an option. But if you can get him, he's certainly an interesting guy to think about. Continuing on. So that is Drew Dahlman. We talked about Drew Dahlman, talked about Ryan Kelly. Those are two probably the most obvious names. As we kind of go through some of these other names, I want to bring up a name that's probably not realistic for different reasons, but I think is an interesting name. All right. You're not going to probably hear his name from anybody else. Dylan McMahon. Dylan McMahon is a guy who is an exclusive rights free agent for the Rams. What does that mean? It means that he's probably not going to be available. If the Rams offer him a minimum deal, they can keep him. Okay. And he won't be able to sign elsewhere. They probably will do that. They may have already done that. But why am I bringing up this guy? Well, Dylan McMahon for me is interesting because he, in some limited opportunities, like he was drafted last year. I'm not even sure why he's available, to be honest. He played against the Seahawks in the last game of the season, and he played 66 snaps. Did not do well from a grading perspective, but this is a guy who is 24 years old, 6'4", 305. He had a 98th percentile RAS score coming out of North Carolina State last year. His speed off the charts for his size, 5.1, 40-yard dash. His 10-yard split, 1.75. His agility was elite. 99th percentile shuttle score, 99th percentile 3-cone drill. His explosion was elite. So athletically, Dylan McMahon is a really interesting player. I don't think they're going to sign him to be their new center, but I think he's a prospect that to me is interesting. And if he were to become available, I think would be an interesting additional name to add to the pile of Oluwatimi and Jalen Sundell, who are already with the team. Other centers. Let's keep going down the list and looking at a couple other people to see where they fit in this list. So Coleman Shelton for the Bears. He's 30 years old. The Bears were a very bad offensive line. You generally don't want to be looking to them for answers. Coleman Shelton, much more of a gap scheme guy. He was a 58.7 grade in zone blocking last year. We know about Nick Harris. I don't think they're going to go back to Nick Harris. Liam Eichenberg is a guy that's played guard and center, and he's a free agent from the Dolphins. It's possible they could look at him, but he's primarily been kind of a guard option and not necessarily the best. But let's take a quick look. I will pull up Liam Eichenberg. So yeah, he was a starter at right guard last year. He's not been good. So I don't think Liam Eichenberg is the guy. Couple other names. So Josh Myers from the Packers. That is an interesting name. Josh Myers from the Packers is 27 years old. He's 6'5", 310. He has not been graded that well. I guess I had a better impression of Josh Myers than what these PFF grades have been. If I go down and I look at some scores here, he is way down there. He is 62 out of 64 centers when it comes to zone blocking, at least for this year. So not good. He has been a starter, though. So I think he's been a mover. I'm kind of curious. I got to look up RAS score for him. Let me look up Josh Myers. My recollection was just more positive for some reason about him. Does not look like we've got any data on that. All right. So Josh Myers, maybe not a great option. Other guys. Now, Evan Brown for the Cardinals. This is a guy that played center for the Seahawks 2 years ago and played guard for the Cardinals now. I don't know that they would bring him back at center. I do think he's an interesting signing. I think, like, if you're going to have a veteran backup, Evan Brown's almost ideal. He can be a backup at guard. He can be a backup at center. I don't hate that move. I don't know that you're signing him to be your starter. Other names on this list. Bradley Bozeman. Let's look up Bradley Bozeman. Where is he on this list? He has been a decent zone blocking center. Has a grade over 63 in that regard. Has been a decent run blocker for his whole career. He's 6'5", 325. He's 30 years old. He has not been a good pass protector. Grades under 55 every year, but his run blocking's been pretty good. Don't know that he's a fit relative to what you've already got. Looking down the list, other guys that stand out to me. I mean, Shane Lemieux is a guy that played for the Saints, and he played with them last year. Is there a chance that they'd be interested in him? Because he had a 64.5 grade in zone blocking. He is 27 years old. He's 6'4", 310 from the Ducks, by the way. And he has not necessarily, been graded particularly well overall, but he is a Saint. John Benton knows him, and so does Clint Kubiak, and he knows those guys and he knows the system. So is Shane Lemieux a guy that they could potentially add to the pile? Sure. They played a number of games with him last year, and maybe they think that he has something to add relative to the other guys, maybe even just to help the other guys come up to speed with how things work. Other names, Ben Brown from the Patriots. Let's take a look at Ben Brown. He got a fair number of snaps. He's had an interesting career with the Pats. And if we look at his career, 6'5", 312 pounds, he is 26 years old. He's going to be 27 in May. He actually spent some time with the Seahawks in 2023. So he got 667 snaps for the Patriots last year at center. Was not graded particularly well. But from a run blocking perspective, he was 25th among centers in zone run blocking with the 66 grade. So Again, maybe a cheap option that they look at, but probably not. I think if you're really looking and handicapping the free agent center market for the Seahawks, I think the guys that are going to get the most conversation are going to be Drew Dahlman and Coleman and Ryan Kelly. I think the other guy that, if you're looking for a third option, maybe a guy like Bradley Bozeman, who played for the Chargers, played under Jim Harbaugh, has played for a very run-centric team, might be another guy you look at. And then I think Shane Lemieux is a name to watch just because there's familiarity from the Saints perspective. So a couple names that, I don't think most people would have known before this. Adam Prentice and Shane Lemieux are both Saints players, one at a fullback position, one at a center position, that may be of more interest to the Seahawks than folks would have otherwise expected. All right, we've got some super chats here. We've got our 12 Hawk Blogger memberships gifted, lucky number 12 from Old School Seahawk. Thank you so much, Old School, for doing that. A bunch of new memberships gifted as we continue to grow the channel. Really appreciate all of you for that. And if you haven't already, make sure you go to jkboots.com, use code HawkBlogger, get access to 10% off on the best boots you're ever going to own. Not only that, every dollar you spend earns you an opportunity into a drawing for a Ford Raptor, a pickup, like gorgeous looking truck. You step out of a Ford Raptor wearing JK Boots, you're going to look pretty badass, I got to say. So head over to JK Boots, use code HawkBlogger, get 10% off. Also, get a chance to win a pair of Seahawks themed boots. They're going to be yours and yours alone. No one else in the world will have these. And you also help charity. So all these things are great reasons to head over to JK Boots and use code HawkBlogger. All right, folks. With that, thanks for tuning in to the Hardcore Show. There's thousands of you that have tuned into this to hear about fullbacks and centers. I applaud you. And we also got to talk to John Boyle. That was great. So have a great rest of your Friday. I'm Brian Emhauser. I will see you tomorrow. Until then, have a great rest of your day.